Okay, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So thank you guys all so much for being here today to learn a little bit more about my thesis project. Over the past 3 years, I've poured my heart and soul into an educational evaluation for the South Carolina Aquarium. The title of my thesis is An Assessment of the South Carolina Aquarium, Structured School Programs, Ability to Improve Knowledge and Conservation Attitudes. I would like to say thank you to all of my committee members, Dr. Kendra Stewart, Dr. William Veal, Maggie Dangerfield, and Jamie Tom for all of your hard work and patience with me as I completed this process. Before I dive in, let me just go over quickly what I will be talking about today. I'm going to start off with a little bit of introduction and background on the topic of environmental education, the aquarium itself, and what my goals were for this study. I'll move into my methods, including my survey preparation, data collection and analysis, and then my quantitative and qualitative results. And last but not least, my discussion, where I will talk about what I found along with the limitations and need for further research. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to utilize the chat feature and I will get to them at the end of this presentation. So let's jump right on in. So, research has shown that environmental education can provide knowledge gains in the same way traditional education does. Learning about the environment increases student interest in the topic, therefore leading them to want to protect it. If children do not develop this sense of stewardship at a young age, they risk never developing that respect later in life. Environmental education increases student exposure to natural issues, and when that education is hands-on and interactive, it has been shown to increase interest in the topic and therefore change attitudes. When talking about this sort of education, it is important to discuss interest and engagement as a theory behind why environmental education changes student attitudes. Research has shown that sometimes knowing about a topic isn't enough to inspire the desire to protect it. Exposure and hands-on experiences are more likely to gather the interest of children and therefore change their attitudes. Positive experiences and interaction with a topic are more often connected to positive attitudes regarding conservation. A child's emotions and belief help to build their attitudes later in life. Getting the students out of their classroom can lead to these positive emotions, which help to build positive attitudes. Educational institutions, such as aquariums, play an important role in this type of learning and increasing excitement towards the natural world. This is why I chose to look at the South Carolina Aquarium for my research. The South Carolina Aquarium was founded in 2000 with a predetermined focus on education. They knew that they needed to provide the state of South Carolina with access to environmental and conservation information in order to help improve environmental literacy throughout the state. Their mission reads, to inspire conservation of the natural world by exhibiting and caring for animals, by excelling in education and research, and by providing an exceptional visitor experience. Right there in the mission, they state the importance of education. In order to excel in education, the aquarium provides informal programming during normal visits, such as dive shows and animal encounters, along with more structured programming in the form of school programs and outreach programs. My evaluation focused on the structured school programs, now known just as school programs. These programs are free for teachers and students within the state of South Carolina. Teachers apply in the summer and they are chosen based on a lottery system. This lottery system bases the schools off of their percentage of free and reduced lunch. The schools with higher percentage of free and reduced lunch are those typically from lower socioeconomic areas. The aquarium uses this system in order to reach students who may not have the means otherwise to visit the facility. Because of this, I found it important to look at how their programming affects students from schools with different levels of free and reduced lunch. Each of their programs are designed to meet the South Carolina state educational standards in science, math, language arts, and even social studies. My thesis looked at the grades 3 through 5 program, which focuses in on food chains and adaptations. I had 4 main, when the students arrive at the aquarium, they have time to explore the building as a whole, along with that hour-long classroom program. These classroom programs are broken up into 3 different elements. First is that introduction, where they learn a little bit about food chains, how to build them, label them, the different pieces, and then the animal adaptations, both physical and behavioral. The students are then broken into 2 different groups. They get to meet some ambassador animals, a snake and an alligator, and they also get to do an interactive food chains adaptation activity. The program is followed up with a brief conclusion and re-emphasis on that conservation message. When coming up with my objectives, I have 4 main kind of questions that I was asking with my research. The first being, how effective is the South Carolina Aquarium structured school programs at increasing student knowledge on food chains and adaptations? Secondly, how effective is the South Carolina Aquarium structured school programs at changing students' attitudes towards conservation issues? Third, what is the relationship between student knowledge and attitudes towards conservation? And lastly, what element of the program is the most influential in creating change in students' knowledge and attitudes? So let's look at how I went about accomplishing that. Well, the South Carolina Aquarium reaches students throughout the state of South Carolina. For this study, it was determined that a smaller subsection of Charleston County would be sampled. The goal was to include all students from Charleston County Public Schools that were attending the structured school programs at the aquarium for the grades 3 through 5 in the 2018-2019 school year. As for the evaluation tools, I created identical pre and post surveys along with a teacher survey and participant observation rubric. If we look at those here, this is the beginning of that pre and post survey. It started off with 2 demographic questions on what school the students attended and what grade level they were in. The survey then goes into ask informational questions about the elements within a food chain, how food chains are ordered, along with adaptation questions on both physical and behavioral adaptations. All these informational knowledge questions were aimed at being formatted in the same way that students are tested on these subjects in their end of grade level testing. The conservation questions followed up, asking first what the source of pollution was in the picture. Then it addressed students' beliefs on their impact on the environment, if they can harm and or help habitats within South Carolina. Lastly, one open-ended question was included, asking what can you do to protect the habitats of South Carolina? This here is the rubric I used to observe students in the classroom. This rubric breaks down the program into its 3 main elements: the introduction, the animal encounter, and the interactive activity on adaptations. Within the elements, I looked at students' knowledge, engagement, and participation. The groups were given a score for each of these categories between 1 and 10. Higher scores would indicate higher levels of knowledge, engagement, and participation, respectively. Along with these numerical scores, I also made sure to make additional comments for each section. And the last of the survey material is the teacher survey. It was sent out to teachers after they attended the program and asked them which school they taught at, what element of the structured school program they were most impressed by, the element that the students continued to talk about after leaving the program, and it also asked what similar field trips the class had done or had plans to do in that current school year. All of the data that was collected from my survey was collected between October 2018 to May of 2019. It involved reaching out to the teachers who won grades 3 through 5 programs within Charleston County. Those teachers were then sent all the consent documents and evaluation instruments. Each teacher had the choice of administering the surveys themselves or having me as the researcher come to the classroom to administer. All teachers chose to self-administer the survey, and all but one chose to do so utilizing the online form. Google Forms was chosen as this online tool in order to help the aquarium continue to use this tool after the completion of this project. The participant observation was set up for when the students were in the classroom, and teacher surveys along with post surveys were sent out to teachers after attendance. All evaluation materials and communications between teachers and the aquarium was completed by Jamie Tom, the school programs manager at the aquarium. Once I received the data, it was organized and coded in an Excel document and then moved to SPSS statistical software for analysis. Knowledge questions from the survey, which asked factual questions about food chains and adaptations, were scored for correctness and given a score between 0 and 8, with 0 meaning none of the questions were answered correctly, and an 8 meaning that every question was answered correctly. These scores were compared using an independent sample t-test, comparing pre and post survey results for each school. The pollution source question, which asked how trash got into the swamp, was evaluated using a chi-squared analysis in order to look at the percentage of students choosing each answer. Conservation attitudes were determined from the 2 questions related to student impact on the environment, and they were coded 1, 2, or 3, 1 representing students that answered no or I don't know to both questions, 2 answering yes to at least one of the questions, and lastly, a score of 3 for students that answered yes to both questions. As for the open-ended question on conservation understanding, or what students could do to help the environment, that was coded into low, moderate, and high categories. The low understanding level, or score of 1, was used for answers such as protect habitats, not kill it. Although these answers show that the students understand what the question is asking, they are very low understanding of their personal impact. A score of 2 was used for answers such as not littering and picking up trash. While these are good things for students to do and understand, it does not go into that higher level of understanding, or a score of 3 that was used for students that went beyond littering and addressed issues such as not using single-use plastics, recycling, or even composting. These answers were also compared using a chi-squared analysis. And for the last of the quantitative analysis, knowledge scores were compared with conservation at understanding using a linear regression analysis. Let's move on into my results and see what I found. So 4 different Charleston County schools attended the program and completed both the pre and post surveys, and therefore were utilized for analysis. For the purpose of anonymity, all the schools will be referred to with an A, B, C, or D, and no student information was collected in order to pair pre and post surveys. All of the analysis was done using the total number of students who participated, along with looking at scores between the schools to see that impact of socioeconomic status as determined by free and reduced lunch. Each school typically brought between 50 and 120 students, depending on how many classes they had in each grade. And here we can see that in every case, we received more pre-surveys than post-surveys for each of these schools. When looking at the knowledge scores across the different schools, in every case, they were higher in the post-survey than in the pre-survey. This independent sample t-test shows that this increase is statistically significant. Pre-knowledge scores on average accounted for answering about half the questions correctly, and that increased to 3/4 of the questions being answered correctly in the post-survey. For those of you that are a little bit more visual, you can see here that that white bar represents the pre-survey and the gray represents the post-survey. When comparing schools to each other, School D had the highest pre and post-survey knowledge scores, followed by School B, and the lowest pre and post knowledge scores were for schools A and C. Moving into that pollution source question that asked the students how the trash got into the picture of the swamp that I have shown here. From the results, we can see that in the pre-survey, a majority of the students at 81.1% said that humans were the reason trash was seen in the picture, while the other students answered with plants or animals. In the post-survey, the number of students who answered humans went up to 91.5%. This increase is statistically significant. The percentage of students who answered plants or animals went down in the post-survey in a statistically significant manner as well. This is seen mostly with the answer choice of plants. In the pre-survey, 12.7% of students indicated plants caused the pollution in the picture. Then only 4.3% of students answered plants in the post-survey. Moving into conservation attitudes. Again, this was scored a 3 for answering yes to both that students are able to help and harm habitats, a score of 2 for answering yes to either of the questions, and 1 for answering no or I don't know for both questions. In the pre-survey, those means were around 2.25 to 2.65. These increased to around 2.5 to 2.7. In each case, the increase, even though an increase was seen, only when looking at the data for all the schools combined, which is this top row here, can we see that that increase was significant. In each of the other cases, it is not a large enough increase to say that it was not due to random chance. Again, here are those numbers represented visually, and you can see those small levels of increase for each school. But it is nice to see that all of these scores are within that 2 range, getting closer to that 3 number, meaning that they think that they can both harm and help habitats within South Carolina, because it means that there is that good understanding of their impact on the environment, even coming into the structured school programs at the aquarium. When looking at conservation understanding, which was determined based on the open-ended question of how students can help habitats in South Carolina, in both the pre and post survey, more than 60% of students were in the moderate range. They seemed to understand picking up trash and ensuring that it did not get into the habitats. The high range almost doubled from 7.8% in the pre-survey to 14.2% in the post-survey. The amount of students in the low category of understanding decreased from 30.1% to 17.1%. Each of these changes seen here were statistically significant. And for the last of the quantitative data, as for the conservation knowledge connection, this linear relationship analysis compares knowledge scores with conservation understanding. It shows that as knowledge scores from the post-survey went up by 1, the conservation understanding also increased by 0.93. This positive correlation accounted for about 14.7% of what affects participants' conservation understanding. As for the qualitative data, participant observation and teacher surveys were completed for schools A, B, and D. School C was not included as they attended the program before the other evaluation elements were approved by the IRB. When looking at the qualitative data found from the participant observation rubric, it was deemed insignificant. Each of these schools had high levels of excitement and participation, scoring between an 8 and a 9 for those elements within the program. It was not apparent that they were more engaged in the introduction, animal encounter, or the activity portion of the program. What is important is that the students had a high level of engagement, excitement, and interest in all the material, and that is what could be indicative of the attitude changes that were seen. The teachers' survey provided data that stated that the teachers were most impressed by the classroom program. A few stated that they were most impressed by the interactive activity portion of the programming. Here I should again remind you that teachers who brought their students for structured school programs also had time to explore the building with the class. As the survey did not specifically state that it was only talking about the classroom portion, I cannot be sure that they were not talking about other aspects of their visit. Most of them stated that the students most enjoyed getting to touch the animals. While this does happen in the classroom with an alligator and snake, it can also happen at the stingray touch tank exhibit, invertebrate touch tank, or many other points of engagement throughout the building. I believe it is also important to note here that the teachers stated that they believed that the most beneficial aspect of the structured school program was its hands-on nature. Moving into the discussion, just a brief overview of my findings. I did find that student knowledge increased after attending the South Carolina Aquarium structured school program. Conservation attitude scores increased moderately as well. And lastly, there were some associations found between higher knowledge scores and an increase in conservation understanding. And from the qualitative data, I found that the most influential part of the program was its hands-on nature, in which increases student interest and therefore their attitudes. I talked a little bit about the different socioeconomic statuses that the South Carolina Aquarium tries to impact. And when looking at the different socioeconomic statuses of the different schools, as determined by their percentage of free and reduced lunch. School D had the lowest percentage of free and reduced lunch at only 12%, and School B had a free and reduced lunch percentage of 38. These schools also had the highest knowledge scores for both the pre and post survey. The lowest knowledge scores were found from schools A and C. Both of these schools have 100% of students receiving free and reduced lunch due to being Title I statuses, within South Carolina. Title I schools are those that receive supplemental federal funding in order to assist schools with low levels of income. Research has shown that these high poverty schools have a difficulty hiring and retaining high quality teachers. These teachers are often burnt out due to gaps in student achievement and the fact that the teachers in these schools typically make less money. The teachers who end up with these positions have less seniority to choose their placements and are often younger with less experience. And these less experienced teachers in some cases can be less effective with their methods of education. Moving into looking back at that conservation attitude increase, even though those increases were small and mostly insignificant, there can be some explanations to this. This could be because students in general are coming to the aquarium with more knowledge and exposure to conservation ideals than the aquarium has witnessed in the past. Here in Charleston County, schools have implemented recycling programs, student gardens, and other activities that would instill these ideals in their students before they attended the program. Because of this, the aquarium has tried to teach students to go above and beyond recycling. They are introduced to the concept of reducing single-use plastics as an even earlier steps students can take to protect the environment. The 2018-2019 school year was one of the first years that the aquarium pushed this new outlook to the forefront of its school programs. It was a learning year for both the staff and volunteers who tried to ensure that all the standards-based material was covered, along with adding that new important conservation message of reducing, along with the typical messaging of recycling. After completing this project, I explored the implications for this work. Program evaluations such as this one can be used to help increase federal funding opportunities for the South Carolina Aquarium. It can also strengthen grant applications and help to encourage donors. Second, while taking the time to write my manuscript during this strange time of COVID-19, I got to thinking about what we now know about hands-on interactive learning and how it can change student attitudes. Now we have to figure out how to provide those opportunities in a new contactless way. Educators today are having to think outside the box to reimagine these impactful activities in a way that works within the new health and safety measures. I would personally be interested to see how the results from this study would be different if it would have taken place during the 2020-2021 school year when hands-on learning is less accessible. Moving into some of those limitations of this project, some of these I have already mentioned. The teacher survey as one that did not specifically ask about the elements of the classroom program. So it is possible that their responses were aimed at the aquarium experience as a whole. Another limitation was the number of survey responses and not always having enough responses to potentially show significance. And even the timing of when teachers can get to administering these surveys can be a limitation. As far as further research, I have many ideas on how the South Carolina Aquarium can continue and expand upon what I have done here. The first is the inclusion of a control group, which would help by being able to apply some sort of causation to the results. Another idea is to extend the sampling throughout South Carolina. As the aquarium does not just serve Charleston County, it would be useful to see how their programs are affecting students in other areas of the state. And the survey, in continuing this evaluation, the survey itself could also use some updating. And lastly, this evaluation could be extended to include a follow-up in order to see how students' knowledge and attitudes changed over time. So to conclude everything, I would like to say that I think the South Carolina Aquarium structured school programs are meeting their goals of reaching students throughout the state and helping teachers to increase student knowledge. They're also helping to create environmental stewards within their programming. And it is important that the aquarium continue evaluation in order to continually improve their already memorable programs. And last but certainly not least, I would just like to give another shout out to my amazing committee members and all those who supported me on this journey. Dr. Stewart, you were always so kind and patient with me and reassuring that this was something that I could do even when I didn't think I could. Dr. Veal, your feedback and helping me get through the IRB process with Charleston County was a lifesaver. I was very nervous about that step, and you made sure that what I submitted was the best it could be. Maggie, I would like to thank you for providing a unique outlook for this study as both a member of the Charleston County School District staff and as a former MAS student. Jamie, you provided me so much support, not only as a committee member, but also as my internship supervisor and boss. You supervised me with all and provided me with all of the resources I needed to become a better educator and scientist every day. I would like to thank the entire South Carolina Aquarium education family for supporting me in my entire journey, being with me in the classroom as I got to work with the students and constantly reminding me that what I was doing is making a difference. And I would like to thank my MES and MPA professors and staff who gave me the tools, resources, and support that I needed throughout this process. And lastly, my family and my friends. Thank you for listening to me complain, motivating me, and keeping me from procrastinating forever along this journey. Here are some of those works cited from this presentation, but thank you guys all so much for being here, and I am happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Patrice. That was very well done. Yes, a little round of applause. Not quite as the same as in person, but applause, but very, very nice. I would like to open it up for questions, and you are welcome to either type a question in the chat box that I will read, or you can use the raise your hand function, or just note in the chat box that you would like to ask a question, and I will call on you and you can unmute and ask a question. And again, this is for anyone in the audience who would like to ask Patrice for some clarification, or Dr. Veal, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, I would. On your scores for knowledge gain for all the different schools, you showed that some schools had a higher gain than others, and you talked about the socioeconomic status of the school, but is there anything else you can tell us as to why certain gains were made in some schools compared to others?
Yeah, so when I was talking about those knowledge gains, each of the schools respectively had an increase in knowledge and those percentage increases were about the same between each schools. What more so was interesting with the socioeconomic statuses of different schools was that they kind of started out on the lower end for the schools with the 100% free and reduced lunch, and then they had a similar amount increase, but it was still then lower because those base scores were lower as well.
Does that answer your question, Dr. Veal?
Well, I want to follow up with your observation notes. Did you see any difference in how the students from the different schools interacted during the program and or with the South Carolina Aquarium displays?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that the students that came in from those lower socioeconomic status schools, for the most part, something that I did find from those teacher surveys was this was the only field trip that most of these students were going on throughout the school year. So when they arrived, there was a little bit more excitement in the fact that this is their only opportunity to experience something like this. Whereas some of the schools that do have the opportunity that were going to other field trips, such as Patriots Point or doing programs through Charleston County Parks, well, they were still excited. It was many of them had been to the aquarium before, and it wasn't as much of a new experience for them.
Thank you. Dr. Watson, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, Patrice, congratulations on a really great study and an excellent presentation of your work. And congratulations to the rest of the committee for so solidly advising this project. I guess, my questions, it was obviously really good that you have, made every school anonymous in terms of A, B, C, and D. But are there any major demographic differences between the constituents have the same kind of demographic characteristics in terms of socioeconomics and any of that kind of stuff?
You broke up a little bit there, but I think that the main answer to what I got from that question is that I did do, because I obviously knew what schools each of those were, and I could look at location and access to kind of marine habitats, and I tried to see if there was any differences in that. And when all of those calculations went into play, it didn't seem like location as far as within Charleston County had any sort of difference, whether they were based closer to James Island or up in even the North Charleston area. The demographics of those kind of areas didn't play any sort of difference in what I saw.
Thank you. Any other questions for Patrice? I think that means that you had an incredibly clear
I
presentation.
have another one.
Okay. No, and please, Dr. Veal, go ahead.
Okay. So you used a chi-square test on some of your data, and you also used a t-test. Can you please tell me why you used two different tests on your data?
Yeah, of course. So the t-test is what I used for the knowledge and attitudes, as those were data that as the numbers increased, those increases meant something. So an increase between answering 0 questions right and answering 6 questions right, that increase of 6 can be measured in a numerical way. So looking at the changes in the means, I was able to see if there was a statistically significant increase in a way that kind of meant something in that way. But as far as the relationship with the pollution source, an answer of plants versus animals didn't really mean anything numerically. It was more so looking at the different categorical variables and how the percentages of students that answered from these different categories changed. And same being with that conservation understanding question. There's no way to say that the change between low and moderate groups is the exact same as the change between moderate and high. Those don't have numerical values of meaning. So that I was just looking at how the percentage of students within those categories changed.
Good answer.
Thank you.
That was a good answer. Well, if no one else from the general audience has any questions, let's once again give Patrice a round of applause, and I'll ask the committee members not to leave. But those of you who have come to support and listen to Patrice's defense who are not on the committee are welcome to go now and send her notes of congratulations. So
Thank you all for being here.
You rock, Patrice.
Thank you. Lucy, you're muted.
yeah.
I Zoom every day and I still do this constantly. Also, Dr. Veal, love your cat. I just want to make sure that you all, I'm gonna not log off because you all are on my Zoom. So I'm gonna assign one of you all the host. And I'll just assign Kendra, so then you can put Patrice in a waiting room if you want, okay? Awesome. Well, great job, Patrice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Jamie, is now an okay time to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry about that. It was loud around me, Patrice. You know how it is around here. So I didn't feel like I should ask when there was so much going on around me. My question, I guess, is you know the aquarium so well, and you know what our limitations are, and you know how hard it was to get those evaluations out and to do the surveys and to get them back. And it is very valuable that you did this, but it's really hard to think of how to keep this going. So knowing how the aquarium is also in some hardships right now, what would your suggestions be on how we could do this feasibly without like running myself into the ground?
Oh, for sure. I think that one of the biggest things as far as the education department goes is to keep a good relationship with the college, because the college always has students that want to do work and help nonprofits, both within the environmental studies field, but also even just the public administration program itself. Doing program evaluation type work is something that you have to do within nonprofits all the time. So having students that are interested in that aspect could help having a student like myself be able to continue to do this type of work. And I also think that now that at least this one survey is made, even if it's not something that you guys are pushing as hard, still just giving it as an option for those grades 3 through 5 teachers, so that you yourselves can just look, even like from the basic graphs that Google Forms provides at the end, like when looking at the data, you can kind of see some of those bigger increases without having to kind of really dive fully into the project, but still getting some information for you guys on your side.
Thank you.
Are those surveys online now?
So they are currently closed, meaning that they cannot be accessed again, but I could easily duplicate them so they're not, and give access to Jamie for those.
Because Jamie, I think that's something that the aquarium could do is, I know that you may not have full participation, because I know I've worked with other students who have worked with you and Brian there in the education department, but somehow have it electronic now and send out the link, ask the teachers to do it ahead of time, ask them to do it on a follow-up day. Sometimes you'll get a result, sometimes you won't, but at least it'll give you a pulse of what's going on. It won't be a research study or evaluation study, but it will give you some information.
Yes, and because we can, if it was coming from us, then that we don't have to have as many of those approvals that Patrice had to go through for all that stuff. So yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, Patrice, I'd love to have access to that.
Of course.
Thank you. This has all been very helpful.
I would second that. Just consider making it a required part of the SSP is participation in those pre and post. I mean, because I don't think it would be a deterrent, because either they're gonna do it willingly, or they're not gonna do it and not feel a repercussion for not doing it. So I think that would be reasonable, considering it's a free experience, more or less, to the school.
Yeah.
Great job, Patrice.
Thank you.
Say, I would think it would be interesting more on the socioeconomic piece of differences in knowledge, to incorporate a question somewhere along